He never flirted with me, not once. And that was the whole problem. Most guys give you something to work with. A look that lingers, a compliment that lands a little too carefully, some small signal that tells you where you stand. Nate gave me nothing, and I became completely obsessed with figuring out why. His name was Nate Calloway. We found each other through a housing app in August, split a 2-bedroom in a walk-up in Portland, and divided the apartment the way strangers do, carefully, politely, with clear boundaries and a shared Google Doc about groceries. He was 26, graphic designer, freelance, kept weird hours, drank his coffee black, and left the pot on for me without being asked. That last part is what got me first. I want to be specific about what emotionally unavailable actually looked like in practice, because it wasn't cold, it wasn't distant. Nate was present, he was kind. He just had this quality of being completely, genuinely unbothered, not in a performative way, not like someone trying to seem cool, but in the way of a person who had genuinely made peace with their own company and wasn't looking for anything more. He didn't need me around. He was just fine with it when I was. That distinction is small, and it destroyed me. The first moment I can point to, the first one I couldn't explain away, was a Wednesday in October. I had had a genuinely terrible day, the kind where everything goes slightly wrong in ways too small to complain about, but too constant to shake. I came home and sat on the kitchen floor because the kitchen floor was where I landed, and I wasn't crying, I was just done. Nate came out of his room, saw me, and didn't say anything, didn't ask what happened. He went to the cabinet, got out the good crackers we both pretended were only for guests, sat down on the floor next to me and put them between us. We sat there for 20 minutes, eating crackers on the kitchen floor, and he never asked a single question. I thought about that for the next 3 days straight. November arrived cold and fast, and we fell into rhythms the way roommates do. Friday nights he cooked, nothing complicated, just pasta or rice bowls, but always enough for 2. I started timing my evenings around it without admitting that's what I was doing. He had this habit of reading on the couch with one lamp on and the rest of the apartment dark, and I started doing my work at the kitchen table just to be in the same light. That's the level it had reached by mid-November. I was rearranging myself around his lamp. One night, he looked up from his book and caught me looking at him. He just said, "Do you want to watch something?" I said, "Sure," like I hadn't been staring. He moved over on the couch and I sat next to him, and we watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures, and he fell asleep 20 minutes in, and his head tilted toward my shoulder and didn't quite touch it. And I did not move for an hour. December is when it got bad. Bad, meaning I started noticing everything. The specific way he said my name, like it was a complete sentence on its own. The fact that he remembered small things I mentioned once, that I hated cilantro, that my sister's birthday was the 14th, that I'd always wanted to go to Iceland for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. He never made anything of the things he remembered, he just knew them, quietly. The way you know things about someone you've been paying attention to without deciding to. I started wondering if that meant something. I probably should have just asked, I know that. But asking felt like dropping something fragile on a hard floor, and I wasn't ready for the sound it would make. There was a night in mid-December where we were both in the kitchen late, both couldn't sleep, and we ended up making eggs at midnight and talking for 3 hours about our families, about the specific ways we'd both gotten things wrong in our early 20s, about what we actually wanted from the next 5 years. He told me he'd spent a long time chasing things that looked good from the outside and felt like nothing once he had them, that he was trying to figure out what actually mattered to him, that he wasn't sure yet. I was sitting on the counter while he talked, and the kitchen light was yellow and warm, and outside it was raining, and he looked up at me mid-sentence and stopped for just a half second before finishing his thought. I replayed that half second for a week. January is when the small things started adding up wrong. He started taking calls in his room with the door closed, which he'd never done before. He got a second monitor delivered and set it up without mentioning the project it required. He was around less, and when he was around, he was slightly somewhere else. I told myself he was busy. I told myself it was a new client. I told myself a lot of things in January. The Sunday it fell apart was ordinary right up until it wasn't. He was at his desk, and I knocked on his open door to ask if he wanted coffee, and he turned around with an expression that I clocked immediately as the look of someone who has been waiting for an opening. He said, "Hey, can we talk for a second?" 4 words that have never, once in human history, preceded good news. I sat on the edge of his bed. He stayed in his chair, turned to face me, and he said, "I've been meaning to tell you something, and I kept putting it off, which wasn't fair to you." He'd found a studio, closer to a client he'd been working with for the past few months. He was moving out at the end of February. He'd already signed the lease 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. I did the math immediately and involuntarily. 2 weeks ago was before the midnight eggs and the 3-hour conversation, which meant that while we were sitting in the yellow kitchen light talking about what we actually wanted, he already knew he was leaving. I said, "Okay." He said, "I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." I said, "It's your apartment too. You don't need my permission." He said, "I know. That's not why I'm sorry." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I said, "What are you sorry for?" And he was quiet for a moment, and something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for, and he said, "I think I made things complicated, without meaning to. Or maybe," he stopped, started again. "I think I knew things were getting complicated, and I didn't say anything because I didn't want to lose the way things were." The rain was hitting his window. The lamp on his desk made everything amber. I said, "In what way was that?" He said, "Good. It was really good, Mara. Past tense, like it was already over." And I felt something crack open in my chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way ice cracks under weight. That low structural sound that means something has shifted and cannot be shifted back. I said, "You could have just told me." He said, "I know." I said, "Any of it, the lease or the other thing you're not saying directly, you could have just said it out loud." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Would it have changed anything?" I thought about that honestly, about the 7 months of carefully not asking, of rearranging myself around his lamp, of replaying half-second pauses and finding them full of things I wanted to be true. I said, "I don't know, maybe not, but I would have known what I was feeling instead of spending 4 months deciding I was imagining it." He said, "You weren't imagining it." Just like that, quietly, plainly, with no drama attached to it, like he'd been waiting for me to say the thing out loud so he could confirm it. And that was almost worse. I got up. I told him I'd post the room listing that week. He said I didn't have to rush. I said I knew. At the door, I turned back and looked at him sitting in the amber light of his desk lamp, and I thought about the kitchen floor in October, and the crackers and the 20 minutes of silence, and how sometimes the people who are best at making you feel seen are the ones who never quite let you close enough to confirm what they're seeing. He was the safest kind of dangerous, the kind that doesn't mean to be. I said, "I hope the studio was good." He said, "I hope you find someone who says it out loud." I didn't answer that. I walked back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the rain hit both our windows at the same time, one last moment of being in the same weather. Then I opened my laptop and started writing the listing. New roommate needed, February 1st. Great light, very quiet. I almost added, "Be careful with that part," but I didn't.